Story 1. I met Sarah in the late 90s. She was 3 years older than me and worked as a local bartender. She was tall, had straight red hair, wore glasses, and had a flirty yet blunt personality. I thought she was exactly my type, at least that's what I believed back then. We clicked as we got to know each other over drinks. Occasionally, when I was too hammered, Sarah would drive me home from the bar. By 1999, we were officially dating. In 2000, she moved in with me after I inherited my late uncle's house. Then, in late 2001, we got a surprise. Sarah was pregnant. We rushed to marry in early 2002 before the baby arrived. At our wedding, my father was his usual self. He jokingly flirted with Sarah and made comments that she was too good for me. He also repeatedly said she looked like my mother did when she was young and called me a mama's boy who was just marrying a clone of my mom. I let his words get to me and lost my temper, telling him the only thing Sarah and my mother had in common was that they both wore glasses. My mom had been a total hippie, which Sarah was not. Realizing I was making a scene, I walked away, but he kept provoking me until I reminded him of something he hated discussing, which made him storm off. After the wedding, Sarah and I had a short, low-budget honeymoon at a rented cabin by a lake. Those few days were magical, though I look back with mixed feelings because of everything that would happen later. From there, the marriage went downhill. Sarah showed her true colors when she demanded I add her to the deed of my uncle's house. I refused, explaining the home was my safety net. She pestered me for months, acting like I didn't trust her. The problem for her was that my brain can flip into apathy mode when guilt is overused against me. Once she realized I wouldn't budge, she gave up. Though she never stopped telling others I was a huge jerk for keeping the house deed solely in my name. She exaggerated the story, making me look bad to her friends. More than once, I had to throw her friends out of my house because they antagonized me. Sarah also kept letting her friends borrow my things, movies, CDs, tools, video games, often without telling me. I got used to the phrase "our stuff" from her, and if I pushed back about it, she accused me of holding it over her head that I made more money. In reality, I just wanted respect and communication. Maybe half of what she lent out ever returned. The final straw came in 2005 when Sarah decided it was okay to loan out my gun, a simple .22 revolver that I owned for personal protection. I kept it locked in a safe far from the kids, and one day I'd opened the safe to get my checkbook. Discovering the revolver was gone. Only Sarah and I knew the code. She had loaned it to some friend of a friend she barely knew without my permission. When I threatened to report it stolen, she balked, saying I couldn't do that. But I explained that if someone committed a crime with my gun, it'd be pinned on her for handing it out. She cried, then got on the phone. The gun was returned by the end of the day. The guy who had it called it a weenie gun and said he used up all my ammo. I changed the safe code, prompting Sarah to have a meltdown about me not trusting her. I started locking all my valuables, and her friends eventually stopped visiting anyway. When Sarah got pregnant again, she became more demanding, flipping out over the smallest problems. I blamed pregnancy hormones. Post-birth, I'd assumed postpartum depression might be at play, but soon realized she was simply this toxic at her core. Over our 7-year marriage, I peeled off one layer of that rotten onion after another until I reached the center of who she truly was. Sarah's parents later admitted to me that she'd been a troublesome teen who drank, smoked, and partied until they forcibly detoxed her and put her into therapy. They said she improved dramatically for a while, holding down a good job. They loved that she married me, thinking it grounded her. Ironically, they ended up being more like the caring parents I wished I'd had. Eventually, Sarah had an affair. By that point, she was downright cruel at home. She drank heavily, tried smoking in the house, and only stopped when I threatened to tear the cigarettes out of her hand. We argued about secondhand smoke and the kids, but she called my concern emotional blackmail. She started dressing like a teenager and sometimes treated me like I was her dad. She disappeared on long outings, refusing to explain her whereabouts, and would come home with expensive name-brand items she could never afford on a bartender's salary. I suspected something was up and began quietly tailing her with the help of friends. We gathered plenty of evidence, photos, receipts, you name it, and I printed them out. One night, I told Sarah we needed a family meeting in the dining room. Once she sat down, I presented my proof of her affair. She showed zero remorse, boasting that she was seeing a younger guy. a mechanic who made her see her real worth. I said I would divorce her and take the kids. She laughed, claiming she would take me for everything in court and paint me as the villain because men are all just that way. She packed a bag, preparing to leave, but I'd had two hidden digital cameras in the dining room capturing everything from different angles, so I had rock-solid evidence of her threats. Once she left, I called her parents, showed them the recordings, and they were furious with her. They agreed to support me 100% in the divorce. Though my state has no-fault divorce, the judge got an eyeful of Sarah's malicious actions. She tried to defame me, but I had recordings of her threats and proof of her affair. Sarah complained that I recorded her without consent, but the judge dismissed her complaint as it was my house, my cameras. She wanted half my uncle's house, but her name was never on the deed. Then came another bombshell. She'd signed my name on multiple credit cards, racking up tens of thousands in debt so she could buy fancy clothes and gifts for her lover. My lawyer pointed out that this constituted fraud. Under the specter of an investigation and possible jail time, Sarah took responsibility for most of that debt. She got a lump sum of half my retirement instead of alimony, but nearly all of it went into paying those fraudulent bills anyway. I ended up with full custody of our kids. Sarah pretended not to care, calling them too much like you to want them. But I could see it was all part of her me-first attitude. She owed me child support, though she never paid it on time, always playing the victim. Eventually, she and her new lover, the deadbeat mechanic, left town. Sarah's parents disowned her, and they're still close with me and the kids to this day. My kids wanted nothing to do with Sarah after the divorce, seeing her for who she really was. Over time, she kept in minimal contact, only to whine about child support or to complain that my own parents, I'm no contact with them, were harassing her about seeing the kids. Once both kids turned 18, Sarah vanished from our lives for good. Thanks for watching my channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Story 2. This happened almost 20 years ago, but the brazenness of those involved still boggles my mind. They occasionally bring up this event, ignoring their own faults. I'm Rebecca, and at the time I was homeschooling my 3 boys, ages 7, 4, and 2, and had an infant daughter 5 months old. My sister Kim had a baby boy named Noah, about 7 months older than my daughter. Initially, I offered to babysit Noah for free while Kim went back to school to finish her master's degree, planning even to breastfeed him because of her financial struggles. Kim decided to postpone her schooling, so that arrangement never took full effect. One day, however, Kim and my mother, Margaret, asked if I could watch Noah for a few hours. I agreed, but only if they picked him up by noon, since I wanted to shift my homeschool schedule. They assured me they'd do so. Kim and Mom dropped off Noah at 8 o'clock a.m., promising to be back at 12 o'clock p.m. By 11:30, Noah was crying uncontrollably. I tried feeding him from the lunch Kim packed, but he ate only a few bites. He wouldn't calm down. I changed his diaper, offered him a bottle. Nothing worked. My 5-month-old daughter, who later was diagnosed with infant GERD, started wailing as well. Now I had 2 crying babies on my lap, and I couldn't set them down. Meanwhile, my older 3 boys missed school that day because I was incapacitated, and my then-husband, now ex, was working from home in another room. I kept looking at the clock, thinking they'd arrive any minute. But noon came and went. I called Kim's cell. Straight to voicemail. I called my mother's cell. Voicemail again. I left messages every 15 minutes with no response. The day wore on with me juggling these 2 miserable babies who never stopped crying. Finally, around 6 o'clock p.m., full 6 hours late, they pulled up in my driveway, acting like everything was fine. I discovered they had gone shopping in another town, turning off their phones so I couldn't reach them. I was beyond furious. Noah was beet red from hours of crying. My own daughter was distraught, and my older children were neglected academically that day. The second I had opened the door, I thrust Noah in his diaper bag at them, carried his car seat out to their vehicle, locked my door, and refused to speak further. They left, but the fallout lingered. A couple weeks later, Mom and Kim had the nerve to ask if I'd watch Noah again. I flat out said no. They protested that I'd once been willing to watch him regularly, but I reminded them how they dropped him off, vanished for the entire day, and turned off their phones. It was their fault, not mine. Still, they blame me for rescinding my babysitting offer, taking zero responsibility for abandoning Noah. They occasionally bring up how I went back on my word. Ignoring that, they broke my trust and abused my kindness. As for why I didn't call the police, I truly worried something bad had happened to them, because ignoring calls was so out of character at the time. If an emergency had arisen for Noah, I'd have had no way to handle it other than calling an ambulance because I had no babysitter for my other children, and my ex-husband couldn't stop working. These days, I'm largely no contact with kin and mom. My father isn't in the picture. My stepdad, Brian, sometimes drives me into group texts if mom is hospitalized. But that's it. They still occasionally bring up the fiasco from 20 years ago, always skipping over the fact that they abandoned Noah for 10 hours. Actions have consequences, but they refuse to acknowledge theirs. Seikyo 3. I'm Derek, 27, and I met Sophie, 25, about 4 years ago at a friend's birthday party in a bar. We both recently ended long-term relationships. Hers was 5 years, mine 4. And a whole lot of drinking later, we ended up on the birthday guy's couch. Naked. Neither of us had planned that, but we'd been hammered and impulsive. The next morning, we woke up in a haze, unbelievably embarrassed. Sophie looked like she wanted to vanish on the spot. We swapped phone numbers, but left it at that. Neither wanted anything serious so soon after breakups. Then we went our separate ways. 3 months passed without a word. Suddenly, Sophie texted me asking to meet for coffee. I'd assumed she might be interested in dating, but when I arrived, she looked devastated. As soon as I sat down, she burst into tears. Turned out she was pregnant and insisted I was the only possible father. My life turned upside down. We did a DNA test after the baby was born to be 100% sure. And yes, he was mine. Once we confirmed that, I asked her to move in with me because she was living in a tiny shared apartment. My guest room became hers and my office was downsized. We named our baby boy Connor. Having a kid was never part of my immediate plan, but since Connor arrived, my life has improved in ways I never imagined. Strangely, Sophie and I never pursued a real relationship in the usual sense. Apart from one brief kiss after Connor's birth, we just coexisted. I supported them financially, paid for Sophie's grad school. She finishes next year. And we split household chores. We cared for each other, but kept it platonic for almost 3 years. Recently, Sophie asked me if I wanted her to move out. She said we could co-parent separately and that I'd be free to date if I wanted to. Her words left me tongue-tied. The truth is, I've fallen deeply in love with her. She's kind, beautiful, intelligent, caring, dedicated, everything I could want in a partner. But I was terrified of jeopardizing our stable co-parenting situation by confessing my feelings. I posted about this dilemma on an online forum and got mixed advice. Some said to speak up, others said to stay silent for the sake of peace. Eventually, I made up my mind. I arranged for my mother to watch Connor for a day, then left work early to set up a surprise. I tidied the house, bought Sophie a bouquet of flowers, and texted her to come home from class to talk, letting her know Connor was safe with Grandma. When Sophie arrived, she panicked, assuming something was wrong with Connor. I hugged her until she realized he was fine, but she kept repeating, "Where's our baby?" Once I calmed her down, I gave her the flowers and told her how I really felt, that I loved her, that I was scared we'd ruin everything. But I couldn't hide my feelings anymore. She burst into tears, saying she'd felt the same way since her pregnancy, but feared I was just being nice. She also confessed she thought she no longer looked attractive after childbirth and that I'd never see her as desirable. I told her she's the most gorgeous, impressive woman I've ever met. We talked for hours, hammered out all our fears, realized we'd each gone on a few awkward dates with other people, but felt jealous about it. That evening, we went out to a small restaurant. No wine since I was driving, but it was fantastic. We bantered about music, movies, books. We ended the night with kisses in the car like a brand new couple, even though we'd lived together for years. Back home, we watched a horror movie, awful, but she fell asleep in my arms. It's still early days in our romance. We decided to do couples therapy because we basically started out living together as parents before we were ever a true couple. The first month was a bit awkward adjusting the dynamic, but we're forging something real. Connor's about to turn 3, and we threw him a Halloween-themed party. He dressed as Bingo from his favorite cartoon. I dressed as Bandit, and Sophie dressed as Chili. Connor was thrilled we were all a matching family unit. He beamed at us and said, "I always wanted this." That moment melted my heart. We've had ups and downs, but overall, we're happier than we've ever been. Sophie just finished some major projects for her grad program, and I'm balancing fatherhood and my job with the sweetness of having a real relationship with the woman I love. It's not perfect, but it's ours. EKILOGE life can spin on a dime. One moment you're single, the next you're married to the wrong person or unexpectedly parenting a child from a one night stand. Betrayals, fights over property, neglected nephews, or unexpectedly blossoming love. These are the twists that prove real life is rarely neat or predictable. Each of these stories reveals the messy, unpredictable side of relationships and family ties. Sarah tried to break my spirit by cheating, forging credit cards in my name, and trying to take my kids, only to end up in a motel with her deadbeat lover. Child support bills in hand. Kim and Margaret abandoned my nephew Noah at my house for 10 hours, ignoring calls while I juggled two screaming babies. Then they had the gall to blame me for refusing to babysit again. Sophie and I started out with an accidental pregnancy and ended up finding genuine love, despite every fear that co parenting would be ruined by romance. In the end, what matters is that you stand your ground, protect your well being and that of your children, and trust that honesty and love, when genuinely present, can surpass even the most complicated beginnings. Sure, life throws curveballs. Some are heartbreakers, and others lead to surprising new chapters of happiness. But as these stories show, resilience, a bit of strategic thinking, and a willingness to open your heart can get you through just about anything. Thanks for watching my channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe.